we got some new stuff coming out of CNN. You have Harry Enton breaking down the numbers, and then we also have Donald Trump going on what's his podcast? Oh, Flagrant 2 or Flagrant podcast or whatever with Andrew Schultz. Yeah. Got some funny moments out of there. So, all right, let's start with the numbers. Let's go to CNN.
How much do the state poll averages miss by? All right, the average error since 1972 in the close races in those battleground states we've been looking at, 3.4 points. 3.4 points. Every single state, all 7 of those key battleground states are within 3.4 points. What's the chance for an even larger error? You know, we talk about the margin of error, right? So what is that 95% confidence interval? What is that true margin of error? 5% of errors in state polling averages are off by more than 9.4 points. These battleground states are well within that. I want you to remember this number because the bottom line is this race is going to be too close to call almost certainly all the way till Election Day. It's definitely going to be within this interval, and it's most likely going to be within this interval. So the bottom line is the state polling averages tell us what it tells us is it's just a race that is too close to call.
So that's not confidence inspiring.
Yeah, so basically it's insanely close and it could go either way.
I mean, that makes me feel like we'd have just as much luck reading the entrails of chickens to determine what's going to happen in the election.
I feel like that too, because if you think about it, 2016 historic miss, right? And they thought Hillary was going to win. Famously, she wins the popular vote but loses the electoral college. I don't really remember how accurate the polls were in 2018. 2020, though, even though 2016 is the more sort of like famous polling miss, 2020 they actually missed by more than they did in 2016. It's just that Joe Biden was able to narrowly pull it off, so they got the overall result correct that he was going to win. But there were polls that were coming out that were like, oh, he's going to win Michigan by 16 points. And of course, that was wildly untrue. So 2020 was actually a bigger miss than 2016 was. 2022, then, you have another miss, but it goes in the other direction. It understates Democratic support. And so all of those predictions of the red wave is coming, et cetera, turn out not to come to fruition. And so now we're in this place where the race is very stable. The polling averages basically have Kamala with a narrow popular vote lead in the, margin of like 2 to 3 points, somewhere in there, which is precisely the margin that as a Democrat you need in order to be able to win the electoral college. And those battleground state polls are just like as tight as they possibly could be in all 7 of the battleground states. So yeah, that's pretty much what we're looking at. The other thing that I've been telling you about, and I struggle to explain it well, but I'm going to do my best. Nate Cohn has been writing about how some of the pollsters have made this choice to effectively kind of like tie the results of their polls to what happened in 2020 because they're so worried about another situation where they're like, Kamala's going to win Michigan by 16 points and then she loses it or barely wins at all and getting embarrassed that they're trying to de-risk their polling results and try to make those results, like kludge together those results to be more in line with reality, more believable. So even if it misses by a little bit, it's not a lot. But the way that they're doing that has the effect of basically almost guaranteeing that the swing state polls that come out look very similar to the swing state results in 2020. Some pollsters are not doing that, like the New York Times is not doing that with Nate Cohn. And they're picking up some movement that looks a little different from what those other pollsters looks like. And in particular, what Nate Cohn is finding is that their models and the way they're weighting voters is finding an electorate that looks more like 2022 than it does like 2020. That means, remember in 2022, most of the country, Democrats did pretty well, but there were a few notable exceptions, especially Florida and New York. Now, Democrats are still going to win New York, obviously, and Republicans were going to win Florida anyway. But the New York Times polling is finding that, Republicans are kind of outperforming in those same states where they outperformed in 2022, while Democrats are holding on and doing pretty well in those Midwestern, like industrial battleground states. So anyway, who the hell knows? That's the bottom line.
So he thinks the polling results are too pro-GOP.
Not across the board, but basically.
Except in New York and Florida, which is
right.
Whatever.
He thinks that the polls are missing the changes that have happened in the electorate post-2020. And there have been a lot of changes in the electorate post-2020, both as a result of people shifting their political opinions due to, major world events, and also because people literally moved a lot during and after COVID. And he feels that the polls may be missing some of those movements that have occurred. So a lot of the polls have, Trump winning Florida by 4 points, Trump winning Florida by 3 points, which is in line with what he won it by in 2020. But in 2022, Republicans, DeSantis easily wins by double digits. Republicans really clean up in the state of Florida. And the New York Times polling reflects that Trump has, they actually found Trump with a 13-point lead in the state of Florida, so an outlier in terms of that regard. But it makes sense if you think that those other pollsters are missing some of the shifts that happened post-2020.
Okay, so 2022 was a midterm election and not a presidential election. So basing it off of that seems a little crazy to me because obviously turnout is like significantly lower in midterms than it is in presidential elections.
Yeah.
That's one point. But the other point is it also seems crazy to me to base it off of 2020 because Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, while they may be similar in many respects, they are totally different candidates. And even just the fact that Biden's an old white man and Kamala's a young black woman, they code differently. It's going to change the electorate massively.
Yep.
So everybody's just sort of guessing in terms of what the turnout is going to be. And that's, you're only as good as your like framework of what you set up to do the analysis. But the other thing is, I will somewhat defend polling because like 2016, yes, there was a historic miss, and I would argue particularly among the non-Nate Silver pollsters. But Nate Silver actually gets a lot of shit for that one when he was the most correct. So he had it at, I believe, 71% chance that Hillary Clinton wins.
Yeah.
And Nate plays poker. I play poker. Talk to anybody who plays poker. If you're 71% going to the river, the other side has a very decent chance.
Sometimes they're going to hit. Yeah.
Sometimes they're going to hit. Yeah. And then also, in terms of like the final result vis-a-vis the popular vote, it was within the margin of what the polls were saying. Right? It was just that Trump's support was dispersed around the country in the exact way he needed in order to win the Electoral College.
Yeah.
Right? So, and then the other thing is, in 2022, so many pollsters missed because in 2016 and 2020, Trump was underestimated. And so they were like, we just got to bake more support for Republicans into our models. And then it's like, sorry about that. Roe v. Wade being overturned was a total game changer.
That's
All these Republicans being psycho election deniers was a total game changer.
That's right.
And so really, look, at the end of the day, when it all comes down to it, perhaps the vibe test is not really the wrong way to analyze the election, right? And so the question is it going to be Trump is extreme, Trump is crazy? This is the first time Trump's been on the ballot since January 6th, right? Like,
I know.
So we could be missing something big here.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, you have had Joe Biden has been in office for 4 years, right? The Democrats are going to get most of the blame for the things going on in the world right now. Is it going to be a typical pendulum election where it's like, sorry, you're the governing party, therefore, by definition, you're going to get knocked a little bit.
Yeah.
And in that scenario, it would potentially help Trump and the Republicans. So I don't know. It's a lot of, like we said, reading the chicken entrails here.
Let me make a bull case for the Democrats, which is that since Kamala was swapped in for Biden, there has been a huge surge in new voter registration among groups that you would expect to overwhelmingly go for Kamala Harris, in particular, young black women. There was a huge surge in young black women registering to vote. And if you are a new voter, you are very likely to vote. Like, people who have been registered to vote for a while are actually less likely than people who just signed up because they just went through the trouble. It means something to them. They want to exercise their vote for the first time. So that, I think, would be a bull case for Kamala, and that would be something that would be unlikely to be picked up in the polls. Because if you never voted before, then the pollsters are likely to evaluate your likelihood of voting and be like, you're probably not going to vote because you didn't vote for before. So that would be something that wouldn't be likely to be picked up in the voter models. I guess the last thing I'll say is just like, if you look at the Trump era, right? 2016, close election. 2018, close election. 2020, close election. 2022, close election. Like, you're probably pretty safe if you bet on it's going to be a close election. It's going to come down to like Pennsylvania. And I think we're all just going to have to like white knuckle it and see what the hell happens.
Well, just maybe a little silver lining here at the end. Michael Moore, who's been the most correct out of anybody in the country, even more correct than pollsters for the past 3 election cycles, he says it's not going to be close. He says he thinks Kamala is going to win in a landslide. And that wouldn't be a big deal to point out, except for the fact in 2016 he got it 100% right. In 2020 he got 100% right. And in 2022 he got it 100% right. And 2 of those 3 elections he was bucking the orthodoxy and the conventional wisdom. In 2016, when he said Trump's going to win, that was absolutely bucking the conventional wisdom. People were laughing at him when he said that.
I remember.
In 2022, when he was like, it's not going to be a red wave. He was one of the only people making that point. It was like him and Ed and Germentum, and I was too much of a bitch to say I don't think it's going to be a red wave. So I just came out and said, I'm agnostic. I don't know what's going to happen. Everybody else is so convinced it's a red wave. I don't know, right? So the fact that he's had that track record does lead me to believe, like, perhaps he's tapped into something that other people struggle to tap into. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, indeed.